Celtic, in a sense, can be defined by, in a sense that Islam can be defined by 7 pillars, Celtic can be defined by 3, you know, and it's the Catholic stroke Christian aspect, the charitable dimension, and of course it's Irishness. And without any of those 3, then you don't have Celtic in terms of how we know Celtic today.
Billy, in your opinion, what's the connection between Ireland and Celtic?
Well, it's a massive connection, Jimmy, in actual fact, because obviously Celtic were founded by exiled Irishmen. They had come across to Glasgow. They saw the East End, the poor East End of the city, and they saw lots of Irish people coming there and needing some provision, needing some assistance and help. And they decided to found a football club. Now, the basis of that club was to help the poor.
I think Celtic's roots are very much to be founded in the famine. Although Celtic emerged about 40 years after the end of the famine, most of the people who founded Celtic, who began to play with Celtic, who began to support the club, were either the direct immigrants from the famine itself or the offspring of those immigrants. So the famine is absolutely intrinsic to the roots of Celtic and our knowledge and our way to understand Celtic Football Club.
Glasgow's Irish came from the Ulster area, you know, traditional province of Ulster in the northeast, particularly Donegal, parts of Fermanagh, maybe in northern Sligo.
They entered an environment that was traditionally very anti-Catholic. You know, if we take a figure from 200 years ago, for example, in Glasgow in the 1790s, there was something along the lines of 43 Catholics in the city. There was 2 in Lanarkshire. You know, and this is an area where there's maybe 1.5 million people, 2 million people now live today. But there was this amount of Catholics, and there was 60 anti-Catholic societies in Glasgow.
The issue of Scottish, if you like, anti-Irishism and anti-Catholicism, if you like, it's multi-layered. There's a whole variety of things in it. Partly it's economic, and there's no doubt about it. Whether this was the case or not, and that's an important point, it was the perception that they were regarded as strikebreakers, undercutters.
They went to towns and villages like Glenboig, Carfin, Coatbridge, Airdrie, Motherwell, Hamilton, those areas of Glasgow, and just outside of Glasgow on the other side of the country like Port Glasgow, Greenock. They settled there mainly because of the shipbuilding industry, coal mining and the service industry as well.
It tended to be the poorer Irish, those who couldn't raise, if you like, the funding for the transatlantic crossing, who tended to end up in Glasgow.
How aware were you, if you were aware, of the Irish connection at Celtic?
Well, I was very well aware of the Irish connection.
Even before you signed for them?
Yeah, before I signed for them, yeah. I mean, I knew the history of Celtic with Brother Walfrid and so forth, and forming the club for the poor people in the East End of Glasgow. Yeah, I knew all about that.
They lived in abject poverty when they first went to Glasgow.
When they first went over there, yes, and to this day, Jimmy, the East End of the city is the poorest part of the city. And the brightest spot of it is Celtic Park. It's a wonderful memorial to those Irish people, and it was lovely to see Brother Walfrid being remembered earlier in the year when they put a statue in his honour outside the main door at Celtic Park.
Walfrid, of course, was a child during the time of the famine, so he had direct experience of the famine himself, and a few years later he came to Scotland, he became a Marist brother. And I think his calling obviously involved the idea of charity and doing things for other people, about being a servant of sorts for other people. And he located himself very much in the immediate circumstances of Glasgow and its environment. And what he witnessed there wasn't a million miles away from what he'd witnessed in Ireland itself, because he was mixing amongst the same people, you know, or the next generation of the same people, and they really hadn't lifted themselves very much from the poverty that they'd experienced in Ireland.
Why would he have started a soccer club in Glasgow, of all places?
Brother Walfrid was based in Glasgow, and he could see what was happening with the huge influx of Irish people, including members of my own family, to the area, where they had come from deprivation in Ireland through the famine, which carried on into later years, to a city where they weren't made welcome. They were seen as foreign, the religion was different, and that was problematic for the people.
Most of the soup kitchens at the time were operated by the Protestant churches, and this was particularly worrying for somebody like Walfrid.
The Church of Scotland ran these things. They knew that the Catholics were starving. Then they would invite them in and say, look, if you change your faith, you give up your Catholic faith and you turn to your Protestant faith, then we can feed you.
Because clearly for anybody of any faith, then you don't want to see people lapse from that faith or drop their faith. So one of the ways to combat that lapsing was to introduce Catholic soup kitchens, and this was meant to counteract the idea of other kinds of soup kitchens taking people away from their faith, and from this idea as well developed the idea of Celtic Football Club.
I think it's terrific. I really think to this day it provides us with a lovely history, a lovely structure that we were founded for positive reasons. The fact that the club has grown so large is a testament to Brother Walfrid and his colleagues.
Charity is vital to understanding Celtic. Obviously, we have it in terms of Brother Walfrid and the Marist Order and the St Vincent de Paul and all of these organisations that were involved in the beginning of Celtic. And charity was at the forefront of their minds when it came to motivation, why we should have a club and what the club is all about. But this comes right through until the present day, and obviously Celtic as an institution has its charity arm, a charity function that probably in the past 10 years has raised about £1 million and dispersed that amongst good causes. But the most important aspect of Celtic's charity has always been the fans, you know, and there's a real rich history in terms of the fans raising and distributing funds amongst all sorts of charities. Whether it's in the current day with the North American Celtic clubs or the European ones, or in Australia, or those located in Ireland or all over Britain, but particularly in Scotland, charity is at the very, it forms the ethos of a lot of those clubs.
Over the last few years, taken a big interest in what happened to the Irish, where they went to throughout the world, and in particular coming to the west of Scotland, and Glasgow in particular. Two things almost run in parallel. The Irish coming to Scotland and Celtic being formed by Irish when they came there. The trials and tribulations that both had to experience, the things that happened to them. The Irish community at first weren't welcomed in Scotland, and neither were Celtic, but they both progressed, they both became strong, and they both blossomed. So they almost run in parallel right throughout the whole history.
The Reverend Brother who founded Celtic, and whose statue is in Parkhead now, or Celtic Park, it was shortly after the Gaelic Athletic Association here was formed in Hayes' Hotel in Thurles in November 1884. Shortly after that, isn't it surprising, or slightly surprising, that they didn't form a Gaelic club like hurling and football in Scotland?
Yeah, it possibly is, and I think when he saw the success that Hibernian in Scotland had, maybe the idea was that maybe the Gaelic might have been a good idea, but here's a better idea. Here's something that the native Scots can also relate to. Here's a game that they seem to like, so why can't we do it in Glasgow?
My sense is that it's bound up at root with the emergence of soccer as the game of the working class, and by that time the Irish Catholic community, whether they were first, second or third generation, were well bedded down within that class in Scotland. And there's hardly any evidence of any serious desire. I mean, you'll find examples of it happening, but any serious comprehensive desire to establish Gaelic football as the